George Russell is on the chopping block. Rumors are swirling that Max Verstappen has signed a deal with Mercedes to become a full time driver for them in 2026 and beyond in a lunch in Sardinia with Toto Wolff, and it's expected to be fully announced in the coming week. After years of Toto Wolff making a push to sign Verstappen and it never looking like it was going to happen, it seems to have finally worked. Now, this is no coincidence that it just materialized now, because Max didn't have a reason to leave Red Bull until now. With the losses of Rob Marshall to McLaren, Adrian Newey to Aston Martin, Jonathan Wheatley to Sauber, and the loss of plenty more Red Bull staff, he has all the right to leave. Red Bull has been on the downturn for a while now, as we know that there's been plenty of internal conflict between Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, and both Max and Jos Verstappen. While conflict within a team was always bound to happen, combining it with increasingly poor results and a car that is more undrivable than the junior team, a change is needed. The final straw was Red Bull firing Christian Horner, but even that doesn't seem to be making Max content with staying in Milton Keynes, and therefore looking to move to his old rival, Mercedes. Now, you can't blame Mercedes for wanting Max Verstappen, because who wouldn't? Currently third in the championship, with a car that seems like a chore to drive, his driving ability is more present than ever, and more apparent than any other driver on the grid. In a way, it's very similar to the situation we had last year with Lewis Hamilton jumping ship to go to Ferrari, and them having to offload Carlos Sainz when they arguably had the strongest driver pairing on the grid. But in this scenario, it's George Russell who's taking the hit. Kimi Antonelli is going nowhere after Mercedes has allocated so much to backing him in the junior categories. They've been funding him since 2018 when he was karting at just 12 years old. They had him skip past F3, straight to F2, and then promoted him directly to the Mercedes team rather than putting him through a reserve role or Williams. And considering he already scored a podium for them, I think they're sold and they're not going to quit on him this early. Now, George Russell was also a junior driver for the Mercedes team when he joined in 2017 by putting together a PowerPoint presentation to Toto Wolff on why he should sign with them. Wolff did sign him, but he set him a hard task of winning both the GP3 and F2 titles before even thinking about putting him in F1. Russell won the GP3 title and then presented another PowerPoint to Williams' chief technical officer at the time, Paddy Lowe, but it didn't work that time, so Russell went to F2 and won the title there. After that, Toto had no choice but to put George in the Williams seat for 3 years before being promoted to Mercedes. You see the difference, right? One was backed fully and signed on by the team, and the other scraped together a few school presentations. It seems like Mercedes does have a favorite child. George would be the one that they decide to replace, but it's not like he isn't pulling his weight. George Russell currently sits fourth in the standings, 18 points behind Max Verstappen, and he has won a race this year in Canada, along with 4 other podiums this season in Australia, China, Bahrain, and Miami. But the issue is, no matter how good he's doing, he isn't a 4-time world champion. As much as you can feel bad for George, from a team perspective, you just can't say no to Max Verstappen. Now, it's not like George has been completely shunned. He has had discussions with re-signing for Mercedes, and he has had contracts offered to him, but they simply haven't materialized for the reason that Mercedes will still be interested in Max. The offered contract is shorter, being a 1-year deal with an extra year as an option, which would align perfectly with when Max Verstappen's Red Bull contract expires, or when it would be easier to make a buyout. If George were to sign the contract, he would just be delaying the inevitable, and he would have to go through the same process in a few years. But that actually wouldn't be terrible. Considering there isn't much space on the grid this year for George in a good car, holding out and hoping the driver market gets better is in his interest. But if the rumors are true, that option's long gone now. So, what would George's options be? Well, with McLaren, Williams, Audi, and Ferrari all being locked down with their drivers, and Aston Martin being the same unless they decide to offload their Nepo baby, he doesn't have much of a choice. I doubt he would want to go to RB or Haas, so we'll rule those out. And we're left with Alpine, Red Bull, and Cadillac. As for Alpine, it doesn't seem too terrible. Yeah, they're swapping drivers in and out like no tomorrow, but if they were to land a talent like George Russell, I doubt they would do the same with him. Alpine's main shortcomings in the past couple of years has been their power unit. And with them switching over to Mercedes power next year, which is projected to dominate, it could be a solid landing spot. Alpine has always made a good chassis, which we can see the power unit is the issue because at rainy races, their car seems to be equalized and they do a lot better. But regardless of this, they'll still probably be the worst team on Mercedes power. With McLaren and Mercedes likely fighting for the title and Williams allocating all of this year's resources to the new regulations next year, I'd be really surprised if Alpine could outdo any of them, but there is always the possibility. Now, George does have the option to make a direct switch with Max and go to Red Bull, but I fear it isn't all that. For all the reasons Max Verstappen is leaving Red Bull, there are also reasons why George Russell wouldn't want to go to Red Bull. Their engine program next year in partnership with Ford seems to be going terribly, and they'll likely be the worst power unit on the grid next year. On the bright side, with the ruins of Red Bull leaving behind a lot of new staff openings, this could be a new beginning for the team, but it would take a lot of time. George would be wasting his time where he's driving his best in a team that's currently in a rebuild phase. George's final option comes in the form of F1's newest team next year, Cadillac. Now, Cadillac is using Ferrari power units for its first 2 years on the grid, so we know that they'll have an established engine manufacturer, unlike someone. We can assume that they'll be in a better spot than most brand new teams, as they do have a lot of experience in other high levels of motorsport, but they still won't be perfect. Regardless of any experience, we know growing pains will occur, and I think the uncertainty is enough to deter George Russell from joining Cadillac. With either of these options, George would be in a much worse position than he was at Mercedes. It would be a carbon copy to what happened with Carlos Sainz last year, where he was forced to drop to a low level team and pray a spot at a top team opens up, which still isn't guaranteed. It really is a feel bad situation for George Russell. He won everything in the juniors and made it to the Mercedes team by begging. Then he was sentenced to 3 years at the worst team in F1 at the time, and when he finally made it to Mercedes, they were no longer the dominant force they once were. And better yet, when they're projected to be at the front again, he's just being forced out. Regardless of if these Verstappen rumors are true or not, which they most likely are, they've left a scar in the relationship between George Russell and Mercedes. After everything he's given for the team, he knows he isn't in the long term plans, and the issue will only be brought up again if he were to resign. Regardless of how corny the guy is, you do have to feel for him in this situation.